Welcome back to another episode of Sports-Fixx. I'm your host, Carson Becker. We are back talking college football here today. Last episode was about the ACC. Today's will be about the Big Ten, who I think can compete for a Big Ten championship this year, 2026. It's probably going to be the usual teams once again. We haven't seen a lot of change in that in the Big Ten in a while, other than Indiana coming kind of out of nowhere with Kurt Signetti in the last couple of years. But you're looking at Ohio State, you're looking at Oregon, you're looking at Michigan. Indiana probably still up there to compete for a conference championship here, Big Ten conference. And then I got a little surprise team there as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the video. But the big question is, who can compete for a Big Ten championship this year? And it comes down to the teams I just listed, and it's going to be who can play their schedule the best. All these teams have a pretty tough schedule, and Indiana, kind of aside from them, they don't have as tough a schedule, but Ohio State and Oregon have very tough schedules. Michigan has somewhat of a tough schedule, but also the question is, can their offense play better than they did last year? Can Bryce Underwood play better than he did last year? So a lot of questions between Michigan there. Ohio State lost a ton of guys on defense. That's a big question. Also, how good can their offense really get this year with Julian Sand? Are they going to let him pass more? Bo Jackson, is he going to kind of have even more of a breakout year than he did last year? So a lot of questions with a lot of these teams, and I think it comes down to who plays the best in their schedule and who comes together the quickest throughout the year. So who can win the Big Ten championship, as I will pull up the odds for the Big Ten championship here, all the teams on it here. And so it's a big question on who can win. Now, these are the odds. Ohio State sitting at plus 180, Indiana at plus 250. I think that's a little favorable for them from last year. I don't know if they quite should be that high. I would definitely have Oregon either second or first tier, but Oregon at 260. USC, a little bit of a surprise at plus 1,400. A good team last year, played pretty well, won the games that they needed to, didn't really win the big games as well as they probably should have. Michigan at plus 1,500 there. That's a team that's going to have to play a lot better if they want to go and compete for a Big Ten championship and a national championship. And then Penn State at plus 2,000 there. Penn State, I don't know if anybody's really looked at it. That's going to be the team I'm going to talk about later on. Penn State's kind of my sleeper team here in the Big Ten. Their schedule is just not very tough. And they brought in Matt Campbell with a bunch of guys from Iowa State as well, including quarterback Rocco Becht. So some questions there. Penn State also hadn't had this last year was their only bad year in the James Franklin era. So it was just 1 year that they really did not have a good year. So we'll see with them. Couple of questions here is Michigan. Are they really going to be able to compete with some of these other teams? Can they go and beat Ohio State? Can they go and beat some of these other teams that they play? They play USC again, Oklahoma, who they lost to last year. Really, the Michigan team only lost the big games, but that was the difference between them being looked at as a good team and a bad team. They lost to Oklahoma. They lost to Ohio State. They lost to USC. So just games that they probably could have won that they really just didn't play well in. So there's that. There's Ohio State there, Oregon. I mean, all the teams I kind of just talked about are the front runners to win the Big Ten. So we'll go to the first team here as I will show you their schedule. Ohio State's the first team I'll talk about. A big, big question for them. Losing a ton of guys on defense in the draft, in the transfer portal, losing their offensive coordinator. Here's their schedule. It's pretty tough. It's a pretty tough schedule. They got Ball State in the beginning. Of course, they're going to play an easy team. Then they go to Texas, have to go to Austin there. That's a very tough game. Beat them last year at home 14-7 in a very much defensive game that we saw. Will their defense be that good this year as well? I don't know. It's going to be a big question on if their defense can play up to the standard that they did last year. I don't think they quite play up to that standard because that's a tough thing to follow there with that defense. The defense was unbelievable last year, arguably one of the best defenses ever in college football. But they have Jeremiah Smith coming back. They have second-year Julian Singh and Bo Lamar Jackson coming back. They're running back there. They got some other wide receivers coming in, Chris Henry Jr. I mean, there's a bunch of guys. This roster is still very good. They're very good at resetting their roster and continue to compete for a Big Ten championship and a national championship. As I'll go back through the schedule, Illinois shouldn't be much trouble there. At Iowa, it's a tough stadium to play in. They have the fan wave to the Children's Hospital at the top of their stadium. It's a tough stadium to play in. Iowa always seems to have a good defense. That could be a tough game there. Maryland shouldn't be too tough. At Indiana, that was a good team last year. We'll see how good of a team they are this year. There's going to be a slight dip for Indiana this year just because they went undefeated. I don't see them going undefeated again. So that's going to be a slight dip for them. They have to go to USC right after that. They had to play Oregon at home. Then they got Northwestern Nebraska and Michigan, of course, to finish the season on rivalry weekend. It's not an easy schedule for the Buckeyes here, and they're looking at a lot of tough teams here. So we'll see kind of how they go throughout that schedule. You need the offense to be a whole lot better than it was. You need the defense to play up to a standard of holding teams to a minimal amount of points. Now, they don't probably have to play as good as they did last year, because you hope to see a lot more offense from the Ohio State team than you did last year. But we'll see kind of how they play throughout. That's the first team I'm going to talk about here, as I'll go back and talk about the other teams. There's a couple other teams here that are going to go and compete, and you'll see here as I pull up the next schedule, I'm going to talk about Oregon. Oregon and Dan Lanning is a huge question. Now, they've had some good games. They've played some good seasons. Dan Lanning has had an Oregon team competing for national championships in the playoffs the last couple of years, fighting for Big Ten championships and everything like that. They're plus 260 to win the Big Ten right now. And with this schedule, I think they have a pretty good case to go and play for a Big Ten championship against maybe that Ohio State team or some other team as well. But they have 14 starters returning from last year, including Dante Moore and their starting running back, Jordan Davis. They got 2 wide receivers coming back, Evan Stewart and DeCorian Moore, both coming back for wide receiver. And Dan Lanning is just more of a question of, can he get over the hump? Can he go and compete for a national championship at a high level? Now, to his credit, he's lost to the national champion, the eventual national champion, the last 2 years in a row. So last year, they got beat by Indiana, and the year before that, they got beat by Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. The thing with me is they got blown out in both those games. Indiana absolutely rolled over them last year, and Ohio State rolled over them in the Rose Bowl 2 years ago after Oregon went and beat them in the regular season. Now, you won the regular season game, which was an important game, but when it came down to it, win or lose, he doesn't seem to be able to get over the hump and win against those big teams. So I think that's going to be the biggest question here for Oregon and Dan Lanning this year. And to me, I think Dante Moore could very well be a Heisman winning quarterback. I think he could potentially win the Heisman if he has a good year, and he goes and beats these teams, beats everybody he's supposed to, maybe wins a couple big games at Ohio State versus Michigan. Some of these games that you're looking at their schedule here, Boise State shouldn't be too tough. At Oklahoma State shouldn't be too tough. Portland State shouldn't be too tough. Then you got to go to USC. It's a big rivalry game for Oregon. You want to go and win that game. You should probably win that game. USC's pretty good, but I don't think they're good enough to compete with this Oregon team. Then you play UCLA, Nebraska. At Illinois, shouldn't have much trouble. Northwestern. Then you go to Ohio State. You go to Columbus, the Shoe. That's a very tough game. That should be, if they lose that game, that should be their first loss of the season coming in early November. So you're looking at a very good season here, 11-1. I'm looking at 11-1 season, maybe a 12-0 season if they go and beat Ohio State, as long as they don't struggle in any games that they shouldn't struggle in. So I'll give you USC as well. USC could potentially be a loss, but a 2-loss Big Ten team might not make the Big Ten championship there. So it's very much potential. Now, we saw Ohio State's schedule. That's another tough schedule. We'll see how they get through it. But I think there's just a lot of questions of this. Can this team compete at the highest level and go and play for a Big Ten championship and then play for a national championship? I think Dan Lanning is the guy to get it done. And I think with this roster, returning all these starters, keeping Dante Moore, you also have Dylan Raiola, who transferred in. Probably won't play much unless something happens to Dante Moore. But you have a very solid team that should be able to compete for a Big Ten championship and a national championship. So That's going to be the big question with Dan Lanning. Can he go and do it? And I think he can here. I think they probably get to the Big Ten championship. I think they maybe had the one loss to Ohio State, or if they beat Ohio State, they're maybe undefeated, or maybe they go and lose to USC and then beat Ohio State and they're 11-1 in the Big Ten. That is definitely a team playing for a Big Ten championship from what I've been looking at. So a bunch of questions there for Oregon. I think they're probably the most solid team at this point right now because with Ohio State, we just don't know. With some of these other teams, we really just don't know who else is going to go and compete. But it's a lot of the question of who is going to be good this year. It's still preseason. We still haven't seen anybody play. There's a lot of questions. Every year, there's a lot of questions on who is going to live up to the potential and who doesn't live up to the potential, right? You see the top 25 at the bottom. Ohio State 1, Oregon's sitting there at 2, Indiana's at 6. You got all three of those teams should be competing for a Big Ten championship. And even with Indiana at a slight drop, I think they're still very well competing for a Big Ten championship. Now, the next team I'll talk about, you see them scoring through there. 14th is Michigan. Michigan, they struggled last year. They beat the teams that they should beat and then basically lost all the games they really shouldn't have, that all the big games they could have won, right? They lost to Oklahoma, they lost to USC, and they lost to Ohio State at the end of the year. And to me, the reason that was quarterback play. Bryce Underwood was a freshman last year, so he had a lot of pressure on him. He was one of the most highest paid quarterbacks playing in college football, so there was a ton of pressure on him. But the fact that he only threw 11 touchdowns last year as a quarterback and a top 5 team in the Big Ten, top 3 team in the Big Ten is a problem for Michigan fans. He did not play very well last year. They paid him like $10 million to go up there and play, and he just did not play well. He keeps talking about how he's this great quarterback, one of the best to ever play at Michigan, all this stuff. He keeps talking. He needs to stop talking and just play. Just play the game because he threw 11 touchdowns. He threw 9 picks last year. It was not a good year. I mean, you guys went 9-3, 9-4, including the bowl game loss to Texas, if you want to count that. But they were not a very good team last year. They did not compete with the big teams very well. Oklahoma, USC, who really was good, but not really that good last year. And then they lost to an Ohio State team that was very good defense. So can't blame them much there. But this is a team that's always seems, even when they're not very good, they're still hanging around. They're still playing and competing for Big Ten championships. And so that's probably what you're going to see this year as well. Their schedule is somewhat tough. They do play the good teams. Again, they play Oklahoma, Penn State, Indiana, and then they have at Oregon, at Ohio State. So they do play some good teams. That's 5 very tough games there, but good thing for them is 3 of those games are at home. They play Oklahoma at home, Penn State at home, and Indiana. Penn State, we don't know what they're going to be like because we're just going to look at last year where they weren't very good. With Matt Campbell, Rocco Bex, that could be a whole different team. Indiana, they're going to have a slight dip from last year because of what we saw. They went undefeated, and they're just not going to be the same team. We're going to see that. So we don't know those 2 teams, and then they have to go play at Oregon and at Ohio State, 2 teams that should be very good and maybe in the conference championship at the end of the year. So it's not an easy schedule for them, and we'll see kind of what they do, but I want to see a lot better quarterback play from Bryce Underwood if Michigan wants to compete. And I want to see a better run game. The run game really wasn't that good. Last year, he did end up with like 900 yards, I think, by the end of the year, but it wasn't as consistent as you've seen from Michigan teams in the past where they were competing at a high level. Those national championship runs, those games that they were competing at a high level in the playoffs, they were running the ball very, very well and really didn't need that much of a quarterback. J.J. McCarthy was not that great of a quarterback, but he made the plays when he needed to. They relied on the run game, and when he needed to make a play, he made that play. That's kind of what they need out of Bryce Underwood, but he's going to have to do a lot more, especially with his running ability as well. He's a very good runner. He's like 6'4" as well, so that should be a lot better of a team this year than they were last year. The next team, Indiana, a lot of questions with them, losing a lot of guys, losing Fernando Mendoza, losing a couple of those wide receivers that made a ton of big plays in the playoffs and all throughout the season last year. I mean, Curt Cignetti, he turned the worst college football team in history into a national champion in just 2 years. So he definitely lived up to what he said he was going to do at Indiana, and it was fun watching them go play. Fernando Mendoza was great and really fun to watch. Really a great guy. I hope he does well in the NFL on the Raiders. You hate to see him on the Raiders, but I mean, I really liked watching that team last year, and now it's just a question of how good are they going to be, the Hoosiers, or I mean, is it going to go back to being a basketball school? Are they going to really drop off, like losing four games or so? They shouldn't, but they could. 3 win or 3 losses. I mean, what's it going to be like? We just don't know. And of course, their schedule, they play Ohio State, they play at Michigan, they play USC. And then I have at Washington on here as well, just because that's a tough stadium to play in. They had the longest winning home streak last year before Ohio State went into Washington and beat them there, in a game that they kind of struggled with for most of the game. So it's not an easy place to play, but we'll see with Indiana. There's some good teams here. They're playing a lot of the good teams. 3 of the top 5 teams in the Big Ten. So we'll see who who can compete and see if they can compete again for a championship. Now, the last team I'm going to talk about, I kind of already mentioned them earlier because of the odds. It's kind of a long shot if you want to call them in the Big Ten, even though I don't really think they should be because of last year. I think it's the only reason their odds are this far. But it's Penn State, like I mentioned earlier, State College. We are Penn State, as they like to say. Firing James Franklin last year, hiring Matt Campbell this year. It was his James Franklin's pretty much only bad year at Penn State. Every year he was playing 10-2 football, losing to Ohio State and Michigan every single year. They were playing for a great bowl game, losing to the two best teams at the time in the Big Ten every year. So it sucks to see him go, but you do see him at a Virginia Tech team that has a ton of potential to go and play in the ACC there. Now, talking back to Penn State, Matt Campbell brings over Rocco Beck with him, brings over 23 other guys, 24 guys in total from Iowa State, followed him to Penn State. And so it it brings in the question of, can he now, you want to say like turn this team around, but they really weren't that bad, right? It was like they were bad last year, of course, because it all kind of fell apart, right? But with this schedule and the teams in the Big Ten, I think they potentially could have a question to be in the Big Ten championship. Look at the schedule. They got Temple or Marshall. They go to Temple for some reason. I'm not really sure why they're going to Temple, but they go to Temple. They play Buffalo. They got Wisconsin at Northwestern. Shouldn't be too tough of a game if they're playing to the level that they should. Then they play USC at home. That's a tough one. They go to Michigan. Tough one. Then you got Purdue at Washington, another game that I'm like, that's a tough game just to play at Washington. And then you got Minnesota, Rutgers, and Maryland. You're noticing one team. If you're like me, you notice one team that they do not play that they used to always play, Ohio State. They do not play Ohio State this year. They really only have USC and Michigan as their 2 tough Big Ten games. Other than that, their schedule is pretty easy. I don't think Washington beats this Penn State team or that Indiana team. I think they have the potential to, but I don't think they actually do it. So with this schedule, you're looking at maybe 1 loss, maybe 2 losses in the Big Ten. That's the same thing I said about Oregon. I mean, that's a team that could be in the Big Ten championship at the end of the year. So do not write them off. They are plus 2,000 to win the Big Ten championship right now. With this schedule and with everything we know about him, Matt Campbell did very well at Iowa State, and he brought a bunch of guys with him. An Iowa State team that was not terrible last year. It weren't great, but weren't terrible. Not a lot of people talked about them in the Big 12, but this is potentially a team that could be competing for a Big Ten championship. So do not count them out yet. I think they have a ton of potential to go and play for a Big Ten championship. As I'm going to bring up the odds one more time here, the Big Ten odds, just so you can see them one more time. And it's pretty much what you expected. I think other than Penn State, it's pretty much what I expected. But I would maybe put USC, flip USC and Penn State, I think would be the only thing I would change. And these are the odds right now. So it's still very early on. We still haven't seen anybody play, which I can't stress enough. But I think to me, there are these teams that are going to go in play for Big Ten championships. These are the teams that can compete. Everybody else is pretty much out. They're not gonna be good enough. You got an Iowa team that's always relatively good, plus 6,000 if you want to count them in. Great defense, but really just haven't found their offense enough to compete for a Big Ten championship. But that those are my teams to compete for the Big Ten, and that's what I have for this video. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Talk about the Big Ten champion conference, deep dive into the Big Ten here. If you like this video, like and subscribe, and you'll see a lot more of my videos. The next video I will be doing is the SEC, and that conference could go a whole bunch of different ways. So we'll see what happens there in the SEC. Very tough conference to play in. I got a bunch of teams in mind that can win it, and definitely some other teams that are probably a lot higher odds that could probably go and win if they have good seasons as well. So we'll see that. You'll see that video probably later in the week here in the SEC as we get closer and closer to college football. It is getting very, very close, and we pretty much, unless you're a big baseball fan, you're not watching a lot of sports right now like me. So it's tough. It's tough, but we are getting very close to week 0, which has a couple good games as well. But that's all I have for this episode of Sports Fix. Thank you for watching. I am Carson Becker, and I will see you next time.